So today is about what's new in Ultimate 23.1. And yes, I can't believe it. It's 23.1. My first release was 3.3. I never imagined there would be a 23.1. So this is pretty crazy, pretty exciting. And I'm glad to have everyone here to see what we have shipping with this release. And we just have Nimrod's coming in from Singapore. Welcome. Nice to see people from all over the world. It's summer here I'm in Michigan in the Northern Hemisphere. We've got folks on our product team where it's winter. And so it's kind of cool. There's people from all over the world joining us today to see what we've got cooking at Infragistics. So again, our goal is to create simplicity, beauty, and happiness in the world, one app at a time. Everything that you see, I would say, is always a work in progress, because no matter what we ship, we can always make it better. We can make it easier to use. We can make it more beautiful. Maybe it changes with the times of things like design systems and platforms. So we really are set on a UX process to drive amazing experiences, so then you can build those for your customers, but also when you use our products. And that's what shines through in tools like AppBuilder and others that we have. So today's host, of course, we have the A team. My name is Jason. Constantine, who runs our product teams, is with us. George, who is all-knowing on everything UX and UI in terms of product design, senior UX architect, etc. Brian, you can see, is on vacation this week. So he took the week off. He needed it. He's been doing a lot of work lately. So he will not be with us today, but he's with us in spirit. And he had a lot to do with this release, especially some of the neat new things that you're going to see in AppBuilder, because he has a lot to do with the Reveal product now, and we've implemented that in AppBuilder. So Ultimate 23.1, grids, charts, AppBuilder, it's the same story in every release basically for the last 20 plus years, except AppBuilder, of course. But grids and charts are the big driver for why people choose our products. High performance grids with every feature that you can imagine. And we continue to iterate on the grids and the features and what we're doing in these products to make sure that you can deliver great experiences to your users. So the three pillars of 23.1, we focused on three areas, and this is a common theme. Every release now, we're really focused on, first and foremost, AppBuilder. AppBuilder is an amazing tool that really does accelerate how you can build out products. So if you think about the way you've built your apps over the last 20 years, you're writing a lot of code. You're trying to figure out complex problems with layout, CSS, etc. AppBuilder removes all of that, and it does it for you. Even things like data binding, connecting into a remote service, we do all that work for you. And so AppBuilder is a big investment for us to deliver a low-code experience to you, but for developers and designers. So the promise is that whatever we have in AppBuilder, we will generate production-ready code for you. So it's all about getting code output, because there's still a lot of work that you need to do in your code. So making sure that we do that beautifully is the goal. Then we've also invested more in charting in the last few years. In this release, we've done some pretty cool things. And again, this is sort of like early on in where the chart is going, but we really want to highlight that this is an investment. You're going to see some of that today in what we're delivering in chart features. And then, of course, controls. AppBuilder would not be useful if it didn't have amazing components and controls underneath. When we started the AppBuilder journey, it was all about Angular, mostly because our Angular product was really, full of controls and always had like 60, 70 UI controls. And then about 2-3 years ago, we switched our strategy and we said, hey, everything we build is going to be a web component, and we're going to make sure that that will be available in Blazor, in Web Components, in React, and every platform. So now you get the same capabilities and same features across every platform for the most part. And I'm going to highlight some updates coming in the next few months at the end of the webinar. So make sure to stick around to the end because there are some cool announcements. So what are we doing in AppBuilder? And keep in mind, I'm going to rifle through a few slides and then hand it off to George, hand it off to Constantine to do some demos. And I'm going to bring it home with a few demos at the end on some of the chart features. But these are just a few of the highlights. You know, one of the things about AppBuilder is, yeah, we keep filling up the toolbox with components you can drag and drop on the WYSIWYG surface, and you could set properties, and then we preview that and we generate code. But the other part of it is the templates and samples that we deliver. And this screenshot really shows where or what you can do with AppBuilder. So this is actually an app. Our lead UX or UI designer, visual designer on the AppBuilder product built a bunch of new samples that ship in the product. George will probably show some of those, or Constantine will. But what you can do and what you can deliver and the beautiful experiences that you can deliver are just awesome. So this is a sample built in AppBuilder, and it has all of the core controls that you would need in a typical line of business app, and it's visually stunning. So it's using theming, imagery, all this stuff is in AppBuilder. So you can build these things or start with our samples, swap out with your data because everything's data bound here, and then just generate code. So in a day, you could go from, hey, I don't even know what direction I want to head in, to using one of our samples, maybe adding a few screens, changing out some data, and then you could demonstrate that to your manager, your boss, your coworkers, and say, hey, what about this direction? I did this with AppBuilder. And then, of course, George will highlight today, and I think we did this in a webinar last month, was, you know, how do I integrate my design team, right? So my design team is using Figma or they're using Sketch. How does AppBuilder help me there? And you could build this in Figma and just import it into AppBuilder, and bam, you have the same exact thing. You have a pixel perfect representation of what you did in your design tool. So low code, app building, huge investment. You're going to see a great demo of this today. Data visualization. We continue to do new things with data visualization. And a lot of this is because we have other products that use our grids and charts and all these other things. So Reveal, which is our embedded SDK for data visualization, self-service BI, uses these charts from the DevTools products and all of those platforms. So web, WPF, Mac OS, iOS, Android, etc. But we're starting to add further features to do more data analysis on the charts themselves. So I'm going to highlight today a few of those things. We kind of started this, earlier in the year, late last year, with chart aggregation. I'm going to show you that, but also now with being able to do automatic data analysis features along with this new chart toolbar, which is really, really slick and pretty exciting. And this is just like the beginning. We're really going to blow this up over the rest of this year and in the next year, because data visualization, BI, data insights, it is where everything is at now. So how can we enable that for you to give to your customers? That's our goal. And then new UI controls and tons of updates. The updates are too long to list. We release every 2 weeks, every month. It's a continuous delivery process across all of our UI components. So we're always releasing. So even, we have a release at the end of July, which we're going to talk about. And that's why when we do these releases and we try to do these webinars throughout the year, we're always highlighting what's new, what we just pushed out, et cetera. But we've done a bunch of new controls for both Web Components and Blazor, and you'll see those today. And some of them are like, oh, I might not need the dialog control, or I might not use a pivot grid. But I can tell you, you probably wanted that combo box for a while. You might want that select control for a while. So it's continuing to ensure that across Angular, Blazor, Web Components, and React, we have the same controls with the same feature set, the same samples, all these things. So that's the path that we're on with these controls. And it's pretty exciting because we're pretty darn close across the board. And it's been a really great effort by the product teams to get us to where we're at today. So with that, let's jump over to a demo. I think we're going to kick it off with George. move over to Constantine, and then we will, I'll wrap it up with the Blazor stuff. So there we go. George, you can take it away.
All right, so this is going to be a quick recap of everything we have in 23.1. As we mentioned before in the webinar, we are kind of releasing every month, so features are kind of coming in hot every time. But since your last webinar, maybe you have not attended any of our follow-up webinars, so I'm just going to do a quick recap of what we've been adding to AppBuilder. So what you're seeing here is a quick summary of the things I'm going to be talking about. The first thing is talking about our star component, like the grid. As you already know, the grid is a really powerful feature, and what we have done in AppBuilder is make it really easy to set up the grid, enable all the features we have on the grid in a very easy way without actually needing to look at the API. So in this particular case, I have a grid, I have like column selection as a feature kind of enabled, I have row selection enabled on this feature, and then I have filtering capabilities. So this is using the Excel style filtering. And with that, I also get all the other features, like I can pin a column. I can, when I pin a column, it's kind of scrolling with that column pinned. I can unpin the column from these UI elements here. And I can, of course, have the export feature to Excel or CSV. The new feature we have actually added is to blow up this whole column level expectations you have from AppBuilder. And what you're seeing below is another grid, which is kind of bound to the same kind of data. But the difference is that here we are kind of released column templates or custom templates for each of these columns, which allows me to create these nicer looking grids. So in this case, I have a phone number, which has been bound to a chip component. So it looks nice and pretty. And then I have a custom layout created with avatar and first name and last name. So it looks like a nice little user card. And then when you look inside this particular column here, I now have a select box, which is bound to data. So I can actually now select a different value. And if I have, when I move on and show you the grid CRUD scenarios, you'll see how this becomes valuable to us. So in order for us to achieve all of this, naturally, we have to allow you the ability to remove columns you don't need, add columns which are like custom, which don't actually are bound to anything. They're just unbound columns. So I can add buttons or any other kind of menu controls inside that particular row. And to give you a quick look into what this looks like, if I switch over to the editor, and here's what I meant by we try to make the API really accessible to everybody. So if I want to enable or disable features on the grid itself, I just enable grid, the feature list, and then I can just turn on and off. So if I want grouping in my grid, I just enable grouping, and that's it. The grouping is working. And now when you're actually running the app, you can actually try grouping this component. In order for us to do the column templates, you will see in the outline here, every column is a child of that particular grid component. So if I don't want to see some columns, all I need to do is select. I can multi-select, I can just hit delete, and it's gone. And this way you can control what data you're actually seeing here. And if you want to get everything back, there are two ways of doing it. You can always rebind the grid, or I can add a brand new column, which is unbound by default, and I can select what data field I just removed. I can just bring it back. So if I say birth date, voila, it comes back. In order for us to do the column templates or custom templates, what we are allowing you to do is you can, when you select any particular column here, you would see there is an option for that column which says custom templates. And we have three kinds. We have one for the header template, we have one for the cell display, and one for cell edit. And the examples of the cell display and cell edit is what I'm going to show you now. Like in here, I'm using the display template. What that means is I've enabled that template, and in that template, I've added an avatar component, I've added a first name and a last name, and then I'm just binding it to the data source available. So if I remove the binding here, it's just default text called body1. Let me zoom in a bit. And I can bind it to last name. I just search for last name, and voila, I got it back. In the case of the select box, here I have enabled the edit template. And what that allows me to do is in the display, it's just going to display normal text. But if I am in the editor, I can now drag and drop a select component, and the select component items are actually bound to a data source collection here. And that is what's actually rendering all of these elements in here. And with that, you can create, like in this case, I'm using a select, but you could use a combo. But of course, the grid by default actually comes with default templates. So you don't actually have to create templates for everything. So if I go into my hire date, if I double click into it, you can see that this is a date editor, and you can actually change the dates in this way. So that's a quick summary of what you can do with custom templates inside your columns to really change the look and feel of your grid, and then control the columns which are visible or not visible on in your application. Let's move on to Grid CRUD. So with Grid CRUD, this is something which was hot. We released towards the end of last year. And this allows you to actually make changes to your data directly from AppBuilder and set up the grid to enable the create, read, update, and delete operations. So in this case, this is bound to a customer data. I can just click, just double click on here. And in order for this to work, I have done a couple of things, which I'll show you shortly. But I can now just go in and delete that number 1 I just created there. I hit done. And here we are asking you, do you really want to make real changes, or do you just want to play around with the feature? And that's what this allows me to do. But if I turn on live edit, at this point, any change I make, it's going to be persisted, right? So if I refresh, you will still see the changes I made to the grid. To make this work, what we have allowed to do is if I switch to my editor here, this is a grid which is bound to data. But now I have enabled certain features of the grid. So I have row editing enabled, I have row actions enabled, I have row selection just for shits and giggles. And in the major thing I've done is added interactions. So let me just remove these interactions for 1 second. So I can say add an interaction for the row added. Now I can say, okay, for the row added interaction, I want to basically point to a endpoint. And this is already bound to a Open API driven as a schema. So this thing is actually connected to our API. So I can click post on customer, and that's all what you have to do. Same thing for row edited. I'm just pointing it to a put endpoint, and for row deleted, I'm pointing it to a delete endpoint. And that's all you need to do to enable CRUD in the grid. And the experience is what I showed you earlier, is just click, and it works, right? In order for all of this stuff, I talked about Open API, and that's another enhancement we made in our Open API representation in the toolbox. So anytime you have to add a new data source in the toolbox, these are the lists. After you've finished everything, this is what you would end up seeing in your toolbox, right? It shows me the tags for my endpoint. And on top of that, it's now showing me the schemas which we detected in the definition file. So in this case, I have an address input model, a category input model, and these are just the names we ended up naming them. Whatever you name your schema, that's what's going to show up here. If I go back into my toolbox here, as you might be already familiar, the way you add a brand new data source is you just go in, add a REST API, and then you have a choice. You can either provide a direct link to a URL, or you can provide an Open API specification, either via a URL, or you can upload a definition, right? And that's what I've done for this data source called IG Northwind API. So I'm just going to configure this endpoint. And this is our Swagger UI, which allows me to test those endpoints. So I can basically select that. And this one is using my authorization. So I have my key actually added for this endpoint. And since it's authorized, I can now make a request, and it basically fetches the data, for that particular request. And now we are using this data to represent in our toolbox. Now, once you go through this whole workflow, you go in through there, you say, yes, I need everything, I hit done. And now if you come to the toolbox, what's new now is when you go into that endpoint, earlier we were not showing the grouping for the endpoints, but now we are keeping those groupings so it looks nice and presentable. But on top of that, there are 2 ways to navigate to it, right? So I can basically say for category, now we are showing you that this is actually showing me a response, and now I can drill into that response to see what I get back. But if I go back into the previous one, if I go into my schema directly, it will let me get to that schema. And some people are more familiar with what's my data model look like, and I would like to see in there. So I go into my customer input model. So now I'm navigating to that input model directly. And if there are any references to other places, like address is part of this schema definition, I can now drill in directly from the toolbox. So you can actually browse what your schema looks like. And we also start marking out things which are required. And this will become very useful as we move into our form building story, or for any other kind of stories where you like to know what is the expectation from the endpoint. So here it's saying nullable is true. This is also nullable true, but this is required, right? So this kind of a dual experience of either navigating to the fields from the endpoints themselves or going directly from the schema is new in AppBuilder. Go back to preview here. And related to data, this is something which has been there for a while, is that we support hierarchical data. And the hierarchical data is very useful for components like the tree, or if you want to repeat elements based on hierarchical data. So in the case of the tree, you can see as I drill down, all of this stuff is bound to a hierarchical data source. So I can actually repeat based on that collection. So in this case, this is our tree component. And we can add nodes to the tree, and I can also change its, so if I add a new block here, I can change its ordering, right? I can make it indented or not. Since all of the tree is bound to data in this case, I don't need these kind of dummy elements, so I'm just going to remove it. And then what I've basically done is select the item, and I have pointed it to a hierarchical data source. So I called it nested data. And it's showing me that first available level. And that's what I did. I repeated it based on the first available level. And then from the content area for the node, I pointed it to a name from that level. Now, if I go to the second level, and if I try to, again, repeat it, now we have this new area called data context, where it remembers that, under nested data tree, you're bound to components. And now we're showing you the next level, right? So depending on how meaningful your data is structured, this will look much more interesting to you in your use case. But here I'm just selecting, zones, and if I go to the third level, it'll show me another level inside my zones. So we are keeping that context, allowing you to bind deeper and deeper in hierarchical data. Go back here. Now let's talk about the stuff Jason mentioned about how designers can work with engineering teams or integrated design teams where designers and developers are working together. And for that, we really improved both our UI kit, which we have provided for Figma, and also our plugin story, because plugin is what allows us to publish apps into AppBuilder, which become real components and realistic things which you can continue editing and do data binding on top of it. And the way users get started with this whole Figma story is if they are in AppBuilder and they open the main menu, and we have this profile area. And if you say Get Indigo Design System, this provides you all the assets you would need to get started with Figma. So this provides you the UI kit, the plugin, and also sample files so that you can actually hit the road running. And what I have here is Figma, which is open. And this give you a brief idea of what the UI kit contains. The UI kit contains all the components and all the visual states you would need in order to design with these components inside of Figma. I'm not going to go into deep details about how you're going to use Figma for that purpose. But what I'm going to show you is an app which kind of exemplifies the whole Figma to design story. So this is like a very simple landing page I created with the UI components. I've added some illustrations to this design. And each of those illustrations, I have actually explicitly told Figma that this is an SVG. And this is important because when you have visual assets, AppBuilder actually does support the ability to store all your visual assets so that you can use it as part of your design for any app in that group workspace. But once I have marked this out, in order for me to get this design into AppBuilder and make it look pixel perfect, all I need to do is right click, hit plugins, and find my Indigo.design Figma plugin, which I have installed already. And I say create a new app. And here I'm going to pick the folder I was working on, the group workspace, because that's where I want to publish it. I say create an app. And at this point, it's looking through your file, it's parsing all the UI elements which are present here, mapping it to our model. And what it gives me is a link directly, which I can share with anyone, but let me just open up this link here. Let's go here. And this is pretty much the app which I was showing you inside of Figma, but now this is a web app. And the benefit is that the layouts have been vastly improved, because if you're using the new things in Figma like auto layout and things like that, they map to flex layouts. And now what that allows me to do is I can edit this particular app. And now you're seeing the edit experience for AppBuilder. And when I select each of these elements here, you'll see they are actually a component. And this component, I can change it. I can change its behavior or look and feel. I can say the sign-in button is of a different kind, or a flat style or a raised style, and it will make those changes for me directly. And that way you can continue to work in a design tool if that's what you prefer, but then you do not actually have to worry about redoing any of these UIs and layouts. And remember the thing about assets I mentioned? This is the asset which I had marked for export, and guess what? It shows up in my toolbox. And now if I'm using this app, I can just drag and drop and use these assets in a different context, but the design team has already provided me with all these assets, so I can just go ahead with this. Go back to AppBuilder here, close this out. So I talked about the layout heuristics, I talked about the UI kit and plugin. And then we have some new components which we also released since last time we met. One of them is the stepper component, and the stepper component, it's a very handy component when you have that kind of a requirement for creating workflows. And here you can see that I have a stepper created in a specific orientation, so I can just see what the different states are. I can define whether they are horizontally aligned or they are of the kind which are vertical. All of this stuff is actually baked into AppBuilder. All you need to do is drag and drop a stepper component and add steps to it. So let me show you that. So here is the stepper component. I have just, if I needed a new step, all I have to do is insert a step, and then I can have control over what I want to show inside that particular step. The one feature we are working on is adding some specific actions which allows us to call methods on the stepper, so that when you hit next, it'll kind of keep bumping you from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. But all the other things like numbering of this stuff is all done for you. And if you look at the properties of that particular step, you'll see that I can change my title, I can add a subtitle. So if I say this is an optional step, I can just say optional, and that will show up right here. And you don't actually have to worry about creating anything from scratch. Here, the only difference is I have set the stepper to the mode icon, and I have set it the orientation vertical. And then I can, of course, make some changes to it. So do I want to show the content on top or bottom? So in this case, let me just go into this address area here. I have this form added in here. And if I select the stepper as a component as a whole, you can see that I can change its mode to an icon mode or a number mode. I can change, this is the orientation thing I mentioned. And then I can change the text position. Do I want it on the start? You know, if I want it on the end. All of this stuff, it depends on your requirements, but that's what the stepper component includes. The other component we included is, you must have heard about our reveal product, and the reveal actually is available as an embeddable BI solution. And with AppBuilder, you can get started with this very quickly. So here I have an example of a reveal dashboard added inside the AppBuilder. As you can see, it's themed just like the rest of my app here. And in order for us to play, if you want to play with this, all you have to do is, I'm going to remove this component for now. And from the toolbox, you will see there's a component called reveal. And I always use a shortcut to add these components, which is what we are talking about here. It's saying Command E for me just because I'm on a Mac, but I can just say Control E on Windows, and I will say reveal. And now it'll automatically instantiate a reveal dashboard. And this is actually using a demo server. So when the reveal, if you go deep dive into reveal, I'm sure Jason might talk about it at some point, but it allows you to create your own reveal server, and then you can just surface dashboard. So we have some baked in dashboards here. So for example, I think marketing was one of them. Yes, marketing was one of them. And you can see this is a dashboard which allows us to give a very vivid experience inside of your Angular, Blazor, whatever app right now. And you can actually make changes to it. It's editable. And this gives you a lot of power to your end users who are looking for data to basically draw insights inside your app. You don't have to build any of this, just include the component and then you're good to go. And finally, we included Pivot Grid as one of the components just to get you started very quickly. It's available in the toolbox. All you need to do is drag and drop. We are still working on improving this feature. We want to give more capabilities in terms of configuring the Pivot Grid, which is not available right now. But the component itself is available, and Pivot Grid, as you know, is available across Web Components, Angular, whatever the product. You can actually use the Pivot Grid. It's really powerful. As you can see that it's fully functional. You can change the ordering of things inside the Pivot Grid. You can change filtering. It's all baked in. You don't actually have to do any work to get a pivot-like experience in a web application. And then going on to the final points, we always harp about AppBuilder and Ignite UI and Indigo Design all being part of a common design system. And to really emphasize that, we have now included links to our API documentation and the product documentation directly from inside the toolbox. So if you're looking at any particular component, it's a legitimate component because it's a 1:1 map between what we show in the toolbox and what's available in Ignite UI. So if you look at the information here, it tells me that, hey, this is an Angular button. It's also available in Web Components and Blazor. And if I click on View Docs, it'll take me directly to the documentation for that particular product. So you don't actually, if you are a developer, want to know what more can you do beyond what AppBuilder allows you to do, you can have all the resources available to you directly. So if I go back here, if I change my platform, which is how we kind of allow you to kind of design agnostically about what platform you're going to do. If I select Blazor, if I go back into my button here, now it's saying it's a Blazor button. If I click View Docs, it'll take me to my Blazor documentation. How cool is that? And this makes you, really fast in terms of connecting what you're doing in AppBuilder and what would be available in generated code. So this makes it really handy to make that handshake possible. And the one final thing I want to talk about is, of course, we are now generating with Angular 16. If you are Angular customers here, and you don't have to do anything. Whenever you publish, it's going to do it Angular 16. And then we also added this one little hook to switch between licensed and unlicensed packages. So Jason is our biggest evangelist here. Whenever he shares applications with our customers, naturally not all of you are on trials or purchased Ignite UI yet. But now what we can do is, if you are in AppBuilder, if you purchase a license, we automatically detect it and we switch it. But just in case, I want to show it to you. There's a little switch here. I can switch between licensed and unlicensed. And that's about it. That's simple as it gets from switching from licensed and unlicensed. So as I said, if you are already a licensed member, that'll be switched on for you, or you can switch it on. And then from that point onwards, you are now using licensed code generation from AppBuilder. So that's a quick summary of what you will find in AppBuilder today when you start playing with it. So go ahead, try it out with our grid custom templates, grid CRUD, OpenAPI, Figma, Stepper, Reveal. There's a lot for you to play with as of today. With that, I'm going to hand it back.
Thanks, George. That's amazing. That's a lot of stuff. And then just so everyone knows, we can just generate all the code. If I want a Blazor app with this sample, I get it all in Blazor. If I want this in Web Components, I get it all in Web Components, Angular, and that's the beauty. So a lot of the discussion in your teams, especially when you're going like desktop to web, what platform should I use? Well, you don't care when you use AppBuilder because we'll generate exactly the same thing in whatever platform you end up targeting. So that is what's amazing. This sample, like, oh, is this in Web Component? We had one of the questions was, highlight what's in Ignite UI or what's in Angular. Well, all of this is in Angular. All of this is in Blazor. All of this is in Web Components and soon to be React. And I know I've been saying that for a while, but React is something that's a high priority for us as well. But that's a great demo, George. Thank you very much. So let's pass it over to Constantine. I know he's been very active on the chat. But Constantine, you can take it away from here and show some demo code.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. I wanted to answer a question that came through just now, whether all these demos and videos will be available afterwards. So let me just minimize this so it's not in the way. So basically, something that George didn't show this time, all of these demos that we're showing, we built them with AppBuilder. And we have the ability to share them publicly. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my demo even before I do it. And then, the webinar itself is getting recorded. So that's going to get on our YouTube channel. So, after I'm done with the demo, I'm going to get back in the chat so that you don't play around with it before I show it. But basically, I'm going to share it with everyone. And I'm pretty sure George is going to do the same. So George was talking all things AppBuilder. And in order for us to be able to deliver all of these experiences with AppBuilder, as Jason already said, we have to be able to expose all of these components that we feed the toolbox with in all of the platforms that we code generate for. So as Jason said, initially, we started with Angular because the component suite was the richest for us in Angular. And afterwards, we said, no, you should be able to generate against whatever platform you want to develop for. You don't necessarily have to be an Angular developer, and you don't have to be forced to use Angular just to be able to work with AppBuilder. So what we did is over time, we transferred a lot of the components. Actually, by at this point, they're pretty much 95% done. So all of the components that we have in Angular are also available in Web Components and in Blazor. So I'm going to show smaller stuff. And as you can see, my demo is also AppBuilder. And it's possible, and I did promise that in a webinar, I believe in 21.2 maybe, or 22.1. I don't remember exactly, but I promised that we're not going to be showcasing components with documentation articles. Why is that? Because we should be able to showcase them in AppBuilder since we have them in the toolbox. So I have more minor stuff to show, but basically we care about all of the platforms. So with 23.1, and that actually happened several months ago, we added the combo component to Web Components, which also means that it's available in Blazor. So the combo that we had in Angular, it was missing in the other platforms. Now you can get it everywhere. So we have the same combo with the same experience, and you can create forms in Web Components, and you can create forms in Blazor the same way that you would do it in Angular. And you get the same type of validation. I'm just going to go and do a quick demo. Yeah, we select a company, and then we select a position. So let's say project manager. All right. Everything validates. If I clear this, it's a required field. It shows immediately that it's a required field. Now, AppBuilder actually, in preview mode, runs in Angular. So what I'm showing you here is technically not a web component, but I have code generated this application, this demo, and I have code generated it against web components, as you can see here. And here's a project that I have cloned from GitHub after generation, and I've ran it. So this is exactly the same demo, but it's running in Web Components. And voila, the combo is here and works the same way, just like in Angular. So I can search for a project manager. I can select project manager, right? Now, I'm going to switch back over to the AppBuilder one. Second thing that I wanted to show is we also added the stepper component to Web Components. Let me just close this real quick so that it doesn't get in the way. So the same rich component, which George actually also showed in his demo, is now also available in Web Components, and it's also available in Blazor. So, what I did here is I created 3 simple steps. Now, in order for you to get your hands on Ignite UI and on AppBuilder, all you need to do is watch the webinar, which you're already doing, or view the recording on our YouTube channel. As an optional step, you can go to the blogs and see, all of our release blogs for 23.1. Also have like an additional articles that we put out with 23.1, like for example, a getting started guidance with Angular standalone components, because we now support Angular standalone components with Ignite UI for Angular 16.0.0. And there are some links to demos, right? You can optionally go through those. And I'm actually going to use these links. So you know what? I showed the web component combo box, right? Let's see, it does have documentation, which is good. You can actually find whatever you're looking for. But I wanted to switch that combo to not be a multi-select one. I wanted it to be a single select one. I go to the doc and I see, okay, it's this attribute. I got to say this combo is single select. So I get back to this application. You see, it's a multi-select one, right? And what I'm going to do is go back to the code and say, this is this combo, actually. And I'm going to say, this is a single select. I'm going to save, it's rebuilding, reran, voila, it's a single select combo. So was that a laughter?
That is awesome. I love it.
Okay.
Too simple.
I wanted to show some code. Yeah. All right. The final step, by the way, is to start a trial and the stepper. So afterwards, when I share the link to this demo, you can just go and click here. All right. So George already also showed Pivot Grid. So Pivot Grid is also now available in Web Components, which means it's also available in Blazor. Right. We have exactly the same component as we have in Angular, fully functional. Turn on the sales here to view also as a sum, not just the profits. I can switch things around. I can switch how I view the hierarchy, and product comes first and then country comes second. And, just so that there is no gimmicky stuff, this thing is also running, after code generated, right? It's exactly the same thing. If anyone has any doubts. Now, next thing is we added a new feature to our export to Excel functionality, which is whenever you have a grid and you have configured summaries for that grid, we'll also export the summaries, not just the data. So let me real quick show that. I'm going to do export, open the file, and you will see right here at the bottom, also have summaries, not just the data that the grid is bound to. Okay, going back in. Last but not least, our Web Components product, it did have the component parity for a lot of the components, but it was lacking animations. And for some components, it's nice to have those. So I did here like a pretty simple page and say, okay, how are we doing? And it says we're running out of time in the snack bar. All right. So if you notice, the snack bar now comes up with an animation and hides with an animation. Previously in Web Components, it didn't used to do that. Okay. I'm able to show the same thing here. And that's, pretty much all of the list of things that I had. So I'm going to show how the dialog comes up with animation. I'm going to end my session with this. I'm going to hand it back over to Jason, unless there is, any outstanding question I can answer. Right
Nope.
away.
I think that's great. Thank you, Constantine. That's awesome. I was going to say, can you add transitions between the stepper so I can just use AppBuilder instead of PowerPoint? Because I like to use the fade. So when I go from step to step, can I fade in or do a blinding load of the content? Because that would be pretty
actually you can. The stepper uses the tab as an underlying component. And we do have the transitions in the tab.
Oh, yeah.
So
Okay.
it's all configurable.
All right. So maybe the next webinar, we'll try that out. That's
Okay.
awesome. Thank you so much. There were a couple questions. One of them was about Maui. Maui is on a back burner for us. We don't have a lot of Maui requests, but it is something that we're going to look at later this year to update our Xamarin story to the Maui story. Maui won't work on AppBuilder, at least for the foreseeable future. But down the road, these things could all be possible. So there is a chance we could see Maui and AppBuilder, but it's just not a priority now. The biggest thing is modern web and low code for the modern web is pretty much what we've been getting the most push from our customers. So Constantine and George, can you see my screen just to double check?
Yep.
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. So you see my chart. All right. So one of the other pushbacks I often get every release is, what are you doing in Windows Forms? What are you doing in WPF? Obviously those are very important platforms, but they're not where Microsoft is investing, but the enterprise still has the majority of their apps written in these platforms. And in fact, I was talking to a customer last week. He is in charge of a lot of things at a very large financial services company. And I think he said they have 500 million lines or more of XAML code across thousands and thousands of applications, so please don't just forget about that story. And that's kind of where Maui comes in and some other things. So what I wanted to do before I go into Blazor is just highlight the new chart features in WPF. So this is the 23.1 WPF sample browser. The wild thing here is I'm actually running this on Windows ARM parallels on a Mac, which is pretty cool. So WPF runs perfectly on ARM-based Windows machines. Obviously, it doesn't run on the UI, doesn't run on Mac yet, but it'll get there eventually, I assume. But these are some of these data analysis features that we've added, and I'm kind of going to get to the end result, which is the toolbar. But first off, if I look at value lines, so the chart has always had the ability to do value lines, but we didn't have automatic understanding of what the data was in the chart. So what we added now is the ability for you to set a value line on what is the average series? What's the global average? And you can see that the line here is a dashed line. So we also added dash, dotted, dot dash, dot dot, tiny dot, long dash, small dash, dot, all of these dash arrays as well. So you can differentiate between maybe a trend line, a value line, and other lines that you might have, like even grid lines in your application. So here, if I just cycle through these, you can see global maximum, global minimum, maximum minimum. And the reason we do this is because you're building out dashboards, displays, et cetera. And all of this is kind of done automatically in our Reveal product. But when you're in a sales meeting, or you're trying to figure out what parts to order, or you're figuring out anything about your business, the question is, well, what's the average inventory for the last 6 months? What was the maximum inventory last year? If you're looking at 3 or 4 products, amongst these products, what are the minimum values we had for every month? And you're always spitballing. You're kind of looking at bars or lines, and you're making stuff up. And, I guess the loudest person in the room wins. Well, not anymore with these capabilities. So it's actually pretty cool. And these span across data chart, category chart. So when you go into samples, you'll see the new value layer capability on the data chart and on the category chart. So I just wanted to highlight WPF there for a second. I'm going to now bust over to Blazor. And I started to talk about this last year in some webinars, but now this is 100% released mainstream in every product, and it's in AppBuilder too. So in AppBuilder, you can do this chart aggregate function. And what that means is you don't have to pre-aggregate your function or pre-aggregate your data to just show a simple chart, it'll get done automatically. This sample, this Blazor sample, is actually using some drop downs to change the groups, the summaries, and the sorts. So I'm going to show how this guy looks, and then I'm going to show you where to get these samples. So this is my renewable electricity, and what we're offered here is in my initial groups is like, I want my initial groups to be the month instead of the country. So you can see on the bottom, my x-axis has changed. Maybe I'll change this guy to product. Now I get this by product. Maybe I want to change the sorting of the sales. Maybe I want the initial sales to be the minimum amount. So here is the min value across all of those items. Let's do the average of sales across all of these guys. And you can see that my chart changes. Let's go down to country. Now this pops up for country. So the point here is using charts is always complicated. You kind of want to experiment, see how things look, what's the best thing for my user. With this capability, you can offer experiences just like this, like, hey, end user, go ahead and select your y-axis. Go ahead and change what your x-axis might be, and your charts will automatically update. The only code here is literally changing these 3 properties declaratively on any of the charts: React, Web Components, Blazor, Angular, doesn't matter. So chart aggregates, awesome feature, fully released. Everyone has it now, so it's great. Value lines, the same thing. This is in Blazor, another Blazor sample here, basically showing what I highlighted in WPF, but I've got my list here. So let's do the global average across my value lines. And you'll see here, I've got this in the gutter on the left, my purple, or actually it's in the y-axis label area. And there's my dashed line for the global average. And my autocomplete here, or not, my spell checker keeps mucking with me here. So let's do the average per series, and you can see how average per series work. How does this actually work? Well, you can set it declaratively. I'm not setting it declaratively here. What I'm doing is I'm saying chart value lines dot add, and then what value line do I want to add? I want to add the value line type, and in this case, it would have been global average, maximum, blah, 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 blah. So in the samples, you can kind of see how this is broken up and pulled together. So this is huge. I absolutely love it, because in the charts, in meetings, we're always trying to figure out what these values are. And, you know, you don't know. You actually need to look at a table and then sort it maybe, or do some other stuff. So now let's look at the chart toolbar. The chart toolbar is released in 23.1 as a beta control. And what that means is, for the most part, there's probably some features we haven't added, but the big thing is we don't have a ton of samples and docs. So this has just 1 page of samples and docs. Everything I'm showing you here, you can do through the help docs, but we're going to add more capabilities to the toolbar. And then, of course, the samples and docs follow. And this is kind of the story, like when we released the Blazor grid, it was beta because we really didn't have any docs. Like the tree grid, beta, we didn't really have any docs. So that's kind of how we follow. We don't really want to RTM anything until we have the full doc story. But this is your toolbar. And the toolbar has a few features. You've got the ability to do things like zooming in, zooming out. You've got a reset button. But the cool thing is all of the options that you have in the core data analysis features of the toolbar. So for example, if I want to show the min value, you can see that now I have this red dashed line for min, and it'll show me in my y-axis label what the min value is. I can do the same with max. I can do the same with average. And you can see that now I've got these value layers, which I was setting through my value lines, but now it's all done through the toolbar. So you can just expose the toolbar and boom, it's done. Maybe I don't want crosshairs, so I'm going to uncheck crosshairs, and maybe I want the grid layout. So now here I've got the chart, there's no crosshairs. So that means I'm not getting my value layers automatically, but I am getting my min, max, and average for this. If I click here, I can do a reset on this guy. I think now they're, well, beta. So there is a small issue there. But if I go to my trend lines, you can see I can select trend lines or do no trend lines. If I want series average, just show me the average of every series. that will pop up for me as well, which I believe is 9 times out of 10, what you're going to want to show is like, this is my series average, because mostly it's what's our max sales and maybe the average across all series for the year over year, 12-month trail, things like that. If I go to value labels, you can see automatically showing value labels now. This used to be like not a ton of code, but it wasn't like the easiest thing to do in data chart. We tried to make it easier in category chart, but these are all areas where you don't have to write a single line of code anymore. You're just enabling the toolbar, and it will then light up the chart with all these features. And then I think I did show grid, value label, series average, crosshairs, etc. One of the buttons that you're going to see in very shortly, it's almost done with dev, is it's going to look sort of like a table, but you'll be able to copy the image of the chart to the clipboard, or you'll be able to copy the data, the underlying data in the chart to the clipboard. So if you just want to like, hey, I don't want to have a grid next to this to show the data, but I need this data in Excel, copy, boom, into Excel. So those are the sorts of things that we're working on. And you'll just continue to see more investment in the toolbar this year. And then finally, it wouldn't be an Infragistics control if you couldn't completely customize every aspect of the toolbar. So in this case, we've added a custom button to the toolbar, and we've added the zoom in, zoom out directive, basically, or feature to the toolbar. So in this case, if I enable tooltips, there's my tooltips. If I uncheck this, there'll be no tooltips. How does all that work? Well, here we've got different types of actions. So different types of tool actions, checkboxes, buttons, labels, etc. And in this case, there are predefined capabilities like zoom reset, zoom in, zoom out. Those are all predefined in the API that just light up. Like if you use an after ID or before ID with the zoom in, zoom out, zoom reset, it'll automatically happen on something like a checkbox or a button. But then you can also add your own capabilities. So in this case, we've got enable tooltips, right? So down here in code, there's my chart definition. Down here in the code, we are checking what the command is, like what just got clicked on my toolbar. And if it's enable tooltips, then for the series, I want to enable or disable tooltips. So pretty straightforward, pretty simple. And one thing I want to highlight, I don't want to show it in this example. Let me just go to the standard toolbar. This is all that the toolbar is. So when you look at the samples, what you're going to note is that the toolbar is its own thing. It's in the list on the left-hand side because the toolbar can be used for anything. So, but right now it'll bind to the grid very easily. So the goal is I want to bind this toolbar to the chart. It'll bind to the chart very easily. Maybe you want to bind it to the grid and have some interaction between the toolbar and the grid through different commands. So that's really what you can do with the toolbar. Is right now it's great for the chart. We've got a bunch of built-in features. We're going to continue to add built-in features, but moving forward, this is a general purpose toolbar, cross-platform, Angular. It ships in Angular, React, Web Components, and Blazor today. So you'll be able to use it right now. The last thing that I want to highlight, so my code demo is basically just that, the toolbar. But the last thing that I want to highlight are a few resources. So when you download, like when you click download now on Blazor, for example, you've got a couple buttons here. One of them is you go over to the NuGet packages. One of them is you get started with Blazor. So that goes to the docs and all that. But you might be like, well, where do I get all of the samples that I'm showing? And where do I get all the samples in general? So unique is we put everything up on GitHub. You can find everything from issue tracking to samples to whatever the heck you want, all on GitHub. So if you go to GitHub Ignite UI, and you scroll down here, you're going to see eventually Ignite UI Blazor samples. This is a public repo. So I'm going to click Ignite UI Blazor samples, and I'm just going to go to samples. And let's go over to charts, because that's where kind of I just was at. Let's go to category chart, and let's take a look at charts data aggregations, which is a sample that I just showed you in code. So here I can view docs, I can view code, or I can just run the sample. So if I click run sample, this is the same sample that I just ran locally by downloading the code. But in this case, I'm just running it directly from GitHub. So every sample in GitHub has these buttons that will take you to the running sample. So let's go to data legend. Let's run the data legend sample. Boom. There's the data legend. You can see as I'm hovering over individual items, the legend is updating. Very cool. But at the same time, you can see all of the samples are here. So let's go to the basic example of the tree control, or maybe the hierarchical grid. Well, of course, we don't ship that yet. The badge control, different shapes, different variants, etc. So you get the whole sample browser experience, but for individual samples, you can just go over to GitHub, click on one of them, and it will load it up in the browser. Or if you want, if I go to Ignite UI, Blazor samples, you can just download the zip of everything locally. You can clone it in Visual Studio, follow the instructions here to just get it running, and you can run everything locally as well. So super cool, super powerful, and definitely something that probably everyone wants to do with samples, and you can do the same thing with Angular, etc. So that wraps up the core of the webinar, but what I want to highlight is looking ahead. We've got a lot going on in the product today. As you can see, we've shipped a lot. We try to do a webinar probably every 2 to 4 weeks. We're doing a webinar. So if you're not attending our webinars, sign up, because you're going to see always what's new in these webinars. So from a 45 to 90 day outlook, which means, we're shipping every 2 to 4 weeks across these platforms, there's a lot happening. A lot of work is being done on docs and samples. No matter what, the first thing that any developer complains about is docs and samples, and we know this. And that is one area that you are never, ever going to say, these are the greatest in the world, please don't change anything, because everyone wants more, more, more. I want more, more, more. So we're always improving our docs and samples. We did a big tranche of updates in this release, and we're continuing to do more updates in the next releases. A huge feature coming within the next 60 days is master detail in AppBuilder. So for example, I've got my list control on the left, I've got a grid, and I've got a chart. I select an item in the list. Well, we're going to add actions that say, hey, when you select that item, I want to update the grid with the children of that item through this web API call. So that's huge. I mean, this is a huge feature, and I'm very excited that we're working on that, and it's going to see the light of day soon. Following that, about a month after that, we're going to add some more capabilities in AppBuilder, like cross-page variables. Like I have page A, and I want to pass a bunch of variables to page B, and then I want to load a grid or change all the forms and grids on that page based on those variables. That's like the second iteration of this story of dealing with variables in an application. And then we're also adding global variables. So let's say you have a login screen, and the login is George, and George works for company X, and he has permission X because you've retrieved that from the database. Well, now those are global variables that you might be using on every single page as parameters in queries, etc. So very excited about these features. And then, of course, I did mention the chart toolbar. This is, we're going to continue to add these data analysis features to the chart toolbar, and I'm pretty excited about that. And then eventually, probably maybe by the end of this year, all of those toolbar features will be in AppBuilder. Right now, they're still just in the component itself. And then as we move forward in the year, they will end up in AppBuilder. So you can just say, give me a chart toolbar for this grid, this chart, and I want these features enabled. And then boom, it just kind of works. So there's a step to get to every one of these features. So let me go to the last page here. So the message, please get 23.1 today. Log into your account on infragistics.com and you can install the samples based on whatever platform you're using. Like this morning, I just installed the WPF stuff because I wanted to demo chart on WPF. But all of the web samples are going to be on GitHub or right through the sample browser. Of course, on things like Angular Web Components, when you're looking at a sample, there's a button that says Open in Code Sandbox. So you can open the samples directly from our docs as well. So you don't always have to go to GitHub. GitHub is just a convenience when you're there, and it's an easy way to get all the Blazor stuff. Read the blogs. We highlighted a bunch of blogs in the last webinar, but if you go to infragistics.com, community blogs, you'll see blogs from myself, Zdravko, and others, even that feature for standalone Angular components. There's a long blog around standalone Angular components right now up there so you understand what they are and how we support them. So always keep an eye on the blogs and keep an eye on your emails. You will get a follow-up of this recording along with the slide deck. The links to the samples are in the chat as well. And yeah, I think that's it for today. It looks like all of the questions were answered, I believe. And that's the end of it. So I want to thank everyone. I want to thank all the guys for helping out today. And we will see you all at the next webinar, and just keep an eye out for the follow-up email from marketing tomorrow. Have a great rest of the week, everyone, and we'll talk to you later.